So thank you, everyone. I know it took us a little bit to put this all together, and we had a change in one of our members, which took some time getting through the election as well as holidays and trying to coordinate. So I appreciate everybody coming together today. Hopefully moving forward, we'll be able to set a bit of a path as far as when our future meetings will be, so that we're not scrambling via email and trying to pull it all together. Just really quickly, I wanted to just review the terms of reference and our purpose here, because it has been some time since it went to council. Essentially, we've looked at the short-term rental issue. We've had discussions at the council level. There are so many aspects to this particular issue that council had provided direction to create a committee consisting of 6 members, as well as myself and a member of council, to try to come up with some kind of recommendation to council, specifically looking at initiatives in other municipalities, trying to get some ideas of what is working where, so that we're not in a situation where we're going back and forth with litigation and huge costs to the municipality. Some of the other municipalities we've looked at have had some extensive legal fees trying to sort this issue out. So better to find good practices of what others are doing and try to make that recommendation to council as to what fits with the Township of Douro-Dummer. So specifically, the committee is to advise council and make recommendations on potential regulations and enforcement options for short-term rentals in the Township of Douro-Dummer. Obviously, considering all of our resources and what staff capacity we have as we go through that. So I'll try to provide what advice I can. Our deputy mayor will chair our meetings, and we're just hoping for the input from this committee to come up with some kind of a recommendation to go back to council. Essentially, the committee has been put in place. It was a 1-year term based on time of appointment. I would say that was probably the appointment of our final member, so it's relatively recent. We have lots of time to discuss it, although, knowing that we're coming into cottage season, the committee may wish to move things along faster. That was the outside was a year, although if we come up with a solution in the meantime, we can get that back. So I won't go through specifics. I think I've hit all the highlights. If there's any questions about the terms of reference, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will turn it over to AJ, who's just going to try to give us an overview of what the current environment is like in other municipalities, some similar to ours and some not, but just try to give us an idea of what has transpired to date. Are there any questions just about the terms of reference before I turn it over? Suzanne?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, so considering that we basically only have probably 8 months left now in order to get any kind of recommendations to the council, I wondered if we're going to try to work out some kind of a work plan so we can back that up, because it's over the summer months. I think that we're not going to have very much opportunity to meet either. So I'm just kind of worried about the timeline. That's all.
Certainly I can go back to council if we think we need additional time, but maybe once we get through this discussion today, we'll have a little bit of a better focus on where we're going to go with the next meeting, and we can set that next meeting date and have a better idea moving forward whether or not we have sufficient time, if you're okay with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Deputy Mayor Nelson, I kind of stole your thunder and said I would turn it over because that's the next agenda item, but if you're okay, we'll turn it over to AJ.
Right. No, that's great, Alana. We'll turn it over to AJ for the without stealing his thunder. We'll let AJ go ahead and give us his best. Thanks, AJ.
Sure. Thank you, Harold. Thank you, Alana. Hi, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Harold. My name is AJ Gajaria. I'm a partner in the municipal practice group at Aaron Burles LLP. Myself and a number of my partners have represented and assisted municipalities across Ontario dealing with the short-term rentals issue. So I wanted to first start off to say our issues that we're facing in this community, or the concern, or the topic, is not at all unique. This has been a challenge for municipalities, large and small, going from Toronto and Ottawa down to the smallest municipalities in Ontario. It has been a challenge in terms of dealing with the topic, and there have been a variety of approaches. And as Alana touched on, there have been a significant number of decisions, and our firm has been involved, and our practice group specifically has been involved in a number of those issues, and some of them remain in flux and remain live. So my purpose here is largely to be providing neutral guidance and information about the tools in the toolbox of the various types of regulatory approaches that municipalities have taken in Ontario, what the current status of those approaches are with respect to challenges, how those challenges have gone, what the results are, and a bit of the unknown in terms of different approaches. So one area, there's a series of areas in terms of approaching the topic from a regulatory and legal perspective. And I'll take them sort of in opposite direction. One approach, the most simplistic approach, is in the absence of a particular municipal regulatory framework or intervention in any which way, there are private law civil remedies as between neighbors and landowners for issues of private law nuisance. So in some circumstances, municipalities have not taken an approach, and the way that that is dealt with when there are particularly challenging or problematic issues with respect to noise, vibration, music, have been and have tended to be neighbor disputes in terms of civil litigation. So private lawsuits as between owners of property. In that instance, that doesn't involve the municipality and there wasn't any municipal role. So that is a topic that exists in the background, but isn't really necessarily germane to this committee or regulatory approaches that a municipality may or may not take. Beyond that, there are approaches under the Municipal Act where municipalities have sought to increase and strengthen their noise bylaws as authorized under the Municipal Act, as well as nuisance bylaws under the Municipal Act. And that's dealt with in a bit of an ad hoc complaints-based approach where municipalities have a bylaw in place either through a Provincial Offences Act offense or administrative monetary penalties. And that is commonly dealt with on a complaints basis, and enforcement is under those what I would call more traditional regulatory methods that aren't specific to short-term rentals. They tend to be noise issues from properties, whether a person is operating a short-term rental or they're operating as a residential use and you have an issue with excessive noise that is measurable, and or nuisance, littering and things to that effect, either on the municipal right of way or affecting adjacent private property owners or public property owners. That is another form of regulatory approach in strengthening the historical bread and butter bylaws of municipalities. Another area that municipalities have used is land use planning and zoning in a couple of different mechanisms or approaches whereby municipalities in some instances have sought to zone it and regulate it in specified areas of the municipality, either in the form of commercial or in the form of people have defined it as vacation rental units, VRUs, in the case of Niagara Falls and others, to put it in particular areas and also have a series of rules under zoning in a tailored approach, potentially involving an official plan amendment and through a process that is specific to short-term rentals. Other approaches have used general zoning bylaws and prohibitions, and there are determinations with respect to that. And the other category that municipalities have used in the regulatory toolbox are municipal business licensing provisions under the Municipal Act. And some municipalities have layered those approaches on each other, depending on the size, capacity, and the area that I will not speak to, that I'm not capable of speaking to, which would be more, I think, Alana and or the finance folks' bailiwick, is the costs associated with that and the ordering of priorities involving enforcement and licensing and the costs associated with that from the tax base. And so in a brief overview sense, those are the series of categories, and happy to answer specific questions or general questions on those areas. What I can touch on is a couple of the recent decisions at the Ontario Land Tribunal, currently the Ontario Land Tribunal, formerly the LPAT, prior to that, the OMB. There have been a number of determinations and challenges with respect to zoning and other approaches. The most recent one that is probably the most relevant to our community is in Oro-Medonte. Oro-Medonte had a historical bylaw that prohibited uses outside of a commercial zone in residential areas. And there was no wording that was specific to short-term rentals because it was passed far in advance of the development and prevalence of short-term rentals through Airbnb and VBRO and other service providers that facilitate that rental circumstance. And Oro-Medonte passed then a confirmatory or clarification bylaw, as well as an interim control bylaw that addressed an amount of time that short-term rental could operate in a given year where they would not be captured, and then anytime above they would be captured. There was a decision of Member Sharon Vincent of the Ontario Land Tribunal in 2022. That was originally an oral decision, and then a written decision came out much more recently. And the decision rejected the municipality's approach with respect to that confirmatory bylaw. Two of our partners represented Oro-Medonte in that matter, and I can tell the committee that that is under requesting not a judicial review, but a leave to appeal to the divisional court from the Ontario Land Tribunal. So that issue's in flux as to the Oro-Medonte decision and where it stands. Our firm also represented Niagara Falls, where they had a tailored approach under their zoning bylaw, where Niagara Falls has obviously a ton of tourist issues. They permit vacation rental units in certain specified areas with respect to tourist accommodation. And Niagara Falls approach was challenged, and it was upheld at the tribunal. And subsequently, Niagara Falls then layered on top of it a regulatory approach with respect to business licensing and conditions associated with that. And I'm not aware that that has been challenged. So there are a number of decisions dating back to 2006 involving Blue Mountains. The City of Ottawa's approach was challenged. The City of Toronto's approach was challenged with respect to zoning. And there is a fair amount of tribunal litigation involving the variety of approaches in the zoning realm. So amongst the legal toolbox, in summary, there are private law remedies, there are nuisance and noise bylaw associated approaches, there are zoning and official plan related approaches, as well as there are attempts and approaches with respect to business licensing. And we don't have a solidly definitive magic answer that is fit across Ontario. And we don't have one that is definitively defensible because of the fluctuating nature of recent decisions at the Ontario Land Tribunal, particularly in the area of zoning. So happy to speak to any questions that the committee may have. I'm also happy to sit back and listen and allow the committee to do its work and talk about the different options and weigh in as necessary. But I'm in the committee's hands, and I'm here as a resource to ideally be helpful. And that's why the municipality has brought Aaron Burles in here.
Maybe if I could ask a question. Up in Seguin Township, I believe about 3 months ago, there is an injunction application against the property owner on Lake Joe. And you represented, I believe, Seguin Township. Can you tell us the outcome of that injunction application?
So I didn't personally represent Seguin. It's a good question, Doug. Thanks. I may have to take that back because I don't know the current status of the Lake Joe matter. I've heard of it, but I don't know the result of that injunction if there has been a determination. Can you tell me what you know about it so far on your end?
I spoke with the mayor the day before the application, and you were representing the township. And it was a large property on Lake Joe, the worst offender up there. And they were constantly a party house. So Seguin took action. He's an injunction remedy, I believe. I haven't seen the pleading, but I'm not aware of the outcome.
And Doug, happy to take that back and connect with our partners who dealt with that matter and see what the result was, to provide that to the committee. And I'd probably be able to do that by email. That can be then shared with the committee.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, AJ. Anybody else have any questions for AJ? Not seeing any hands. Okay, well, thanks, AJ. I appreciate all the information that you brought forward here with the committee. I'm going to turn this back over to Alana, I believe, for where we go next, Alana.
Thank you. I think essentially this was really just supposed to be an open discussion at this point. So, AJ's happy to stay on. So if something comes up along the way that we do want to inquire or ask him about, we certainly can. I don't know if we want to do a roundtable sort of discussion about if they have thoughts about where they stand right now. I know we did a little bit of that in the introduction, just so we can get some kind of idea if there's a consensus already moving forward or what we need to come back with as far as staff so that we can be prepared to provide the information that the committee needs.
Sure.
Look on the letter you from Mayor Burles. Are you going to circulate that to the committee members?
I'm sorry, Doug, you cut out at the beginning of that.
You obtained, I believe, last April, an opinion letter from Aaron Burles about this general topic. Are you going to circulate the Aaron Burles opinion letter to the members of this committee?
I believe we had one that ultimately went to open council. So whatever we've supplied, I definitely can provide that to the committee.
Just a question I have, Doug, is there any way that you can turn on your video so that we can actually see you?
I wish I could. I'm on an iPhone. I'm not a techie, and I've looked around for buttons. I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to do it.
Oh, okay. Anyways, just to keep order, I'd like to be able to see a show of hands at any time, Doug. That's all.
Oh, yay or nay when you do that.
Okay, that's great. So if we maybe can just go around, we'll go around the table here, and anything anybody would like to add? Can we start off with Jeff? Jeff, do you want to add anything to this conversation?
Yeah, I think as a committee, I think we need to be careful to respect the people in the township and our freedoms as property owners, that we can carry on our business in a respectful way. I don't think everybody should be blanketed with punishment because of a few. And I think that there's ramifications, and there's procedures, and there's ways of going about addressing those particular situations without having to affect everybody that is abiding with it. Usually it is a small number that abuses a situation. So that's something maybe we can address and nip that in the bud. I just think that as a property owner, it's an investment. It's something that we want to respect, and someone could be renting a place and be a great person and be there for a week, and someone could be a terrible person and there for a week. We can also have property owners that are there permanently, and they can be terrible. So, there's good and bad to both sides. In the situations I've been in, I've never had complaints. I've had nothing but respect and compliments on both, on both sides. So I think it needs to be addressed without too many stipulations on everything. It's just rules and regulations to death in this day and age. So I think we need to protect our township and our freedoms and our ownership. So with respect to everybody. So I think as a group and as a council, we can do that and work through this together, respecting everybody's opinions.
Thanks, Jeff. We'll move on to Dave.
Sure. I agree with a lot of what Jeff was saying. I think we have to be very careful because there are some bad apples out there, not to lump everybody in that group. There are a lot of very good people doing things and been doing them for a very long time. I know people who have been renting for over 50 years. I also have, from my client base, a number of very unique situations that we have to be careful of, that everybody's in different scenarios and they rent for different reasons. I'd be happy to share that with you guys in the committee as that goes on. In regards to bringing forth legislation or recommendations, I think it is a good idea. And as Jeff touched upon, it also really has to apply to the property owner as well, whether or not they rent or that they don't rent. I can speak to a number of cases where there are people around that own property that don't rent that cause a lot of nuisance. I'm sure some of you may be aware of it in your dealings with council and so on, or just other councils. I think what's important to note too, as was mentioned in the previous presentation, there just about some of the different townships and the different scenarios that they've come up with. It's important to recognize the size of the municipality that deals with some of these regulations. When you're talking about areas like Niagara Falls and Toronto and so on, and another case study right now is Honolulu, actually, that is really interesting. As a lot of this is funded by large hotel and tourist lobbies because they're losing a sizable amount of rental income to short-term vacation owners. And then again, when you look at areas like some of these cities like Honolulu and stuff, we have to be careful. I mean, it depends how far the township wants to go in terms of its legal defense, that there are counter lawsuits underway right now because people are saying they're being deprived, not just of rental income, but of all the people who are hired to support these contractors, cleaners, things like that. So I'm not arguing and saying that there shouldn't be any. I really do believe there should be. And I think what you're going to find as we go through this, that it really is certain, not just people, but certain platforms that are used that don't facilitate proper renting. I've been doing this full time since 1997. Is it perfect? No, but nothing is. And I'm happy to share the good and the bad with you guys and see what we can come up with. I've sat on other councils, advisory committees, and some have come up with some pretty good ones that I think we should take a look at.
Thanks, Dave. Richard.
Hi, thanks for all that feedback on kind of one side of the conversation that we're having here. I represent the people that actually have chosen to live in the area. This is my home. It's not a business. It's not a businessman. I didn't buy the property and build a house there to run a business. And then the main concern that I've brought to this, which I spoke about when I did speak at council, was what's happening is, and with respect to, sorry, I'm not sure of everyone's names yet. This has been going on since the beginning of time. People have rented places. But what's happened is the internet's put it on steroids. So in my community, I'm on a private road where there's 11 properties, of which 7 currently rent out. So I'm not sure anyone can say that that's appropriate in a residential neighborhood. I find the weekly coming and going, it's very transient on 7 properties, of which we're outnumbered. I'm actually in Naples right now. I own a condo in Naples. I don't rent it out. It's my own personal seasonal use. There's limits here. And now this is done by an HOA, but I think it's a good way to look at it. I mean, an owner can still buy the property. If they want to get income on the property, they're allowed minimum 30 days and up to 4 rentals a year. And that appeases the people that live here that don't want the transient nature of it. And it appeases the people that do want to get some income on it. And that's just my opinion. I mean, that's been clear ever since I've spoken to on it. So thanks for letting me talk about that. And again, hopefully we're all here to come to some sort of middle ground here where I'm happy with the outcome and you're happy with the outcome. So Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Richard. I just have, Richard, I have one question, just on a couple of issues that you said. And I hope you don't mind me asking this, but what is the problem that happens with these people that are on your road? What is the issues that happen? What you've said that there's transients coming back and forth, but what is that issue any different than people that would live there? I guess that's my question.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a fair question because some people don't understand it. So I mean, I'll list out yes, I've had to call the police because some people were having the worst domestic that I've ever seen. My wife was scared or whatever. So that's one incident. I've had a band practicing on the cottage next door's deck that were just there for 3 days. So they're just playing a band. Garbage issues. I could show you pictures of big dogs just running across my deck. And when we approach the people, say, is this your dog? They say, is the dog bothering you? It's like, well, he's on my deck 2 cottages down. So that's the stuff you hear about. The other part is, this is my community. So there's a constant influx of strangers into my community. I do live on a private road. It's private, well, you know what private means. It means it's not run by the municipality, but it's in the last 5 years, it's gone from, pretty quiet to every single week. It's just a new group of people coming in. It's turning it into a hotel strip. And that's just a fact, especially on ours, because there's too many. It's not like there's one, not like there's 2. We're actually outnumbered for the people that choose not to do this by the people that are choosing to do it. So we just think that there needs to be boundaries put in here. That's why I'm here, to voice that needs to be heard, because it's not just about the one side.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Moving forward, I'll come back to you, Jeff. I think, did you have another question, a supplementary question to that?
Yeah, I was sort of going along with you. I wondered what it was like 5 years ago. Like, did the people use those cottages and they were there, and then suddenly they stopped using them and started putting renters in? Was there an influence? I'm trying to picture if it's just something with, if it would have been changed to family or something, and just the same amount of people, or if there's a disproportionate amount of people due to the rental or something, and all of a sudden, I'm trying to picture how it changed so drastically.
Maybe I can answer that. I'll go.
I can answer. Well, no, Doug, I'll answer this just because it was my comment and my road specifically. I've had good friends that have owned, and they've rented out, and normally what they work by is what's called word of mouth and what they call 1 degree of separation by people they work with or whatever. And it's never been a big issue because there was a direct respect and context. But what happened is the property started to change hands. There was a gentleman that had been there 50 years. It was bought by a couple. There was another 2 or 3 then that were changed hands. And then they immediately, last year, ownership took, it was within days of it taking possession, it just became a rental. And that person lived in Calgary. So like the person that bought it. So, this is real.
It was different. It was a whole different demographic, a whole different scene. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we're seeing is just that. And it's come up very quickly. So before that, I think there was a couple of places that would rent out, and maybe they'd rent out maybe a third of the summer, different weekends that they weren't using it, weeks or whatever. And no one really noticed or cared. But then, like I said, it's now gone on to steroids with the internet, VRBO and whatnot. And now we're again, that's too many on one road to even comprehend that being reasonable with that much people turning over. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Nina, would you like to weigh in on this situation?
Sure, thank you. Richard, I'm sorry you've had such a difficult experience. It's my heart goes out to you. It's not easy, but I agree with what we've heard from Jeff and from Dave, and I think there's a way that we can go about this that's respectful and inclusive to people that are there all year round, but also welcoming to minorities and other people that haven't inherited their cottage. Unfortunately, they need the means to pay for it. I think there's ways that we can go about this that's respectful. You know, we can all put our heads together. I think we're a good group here that can come up with some smart ideas. I think we need to make sure that there's a way that new Canadian families, they're able to come to the lake and enjoy the great Canadian tradition of cottaging while still being respectful. They shouldn't have garbage on the roads or their dog running wild. We've had tremendous feedback from people that have, you know, come and used our cottage when we're not able to be there. You know, of the experiences, the memories they've made with their families, and being able to facilitate that for somebody that, you know, may not be able to afford to rent for 30 days, like you've indicated. You know, they save up all their money to have, you know, a week away with their families to make those treasured memories with their children. I think that, you know, the way we've done it, we have a very rigorous process in place that I've shared with the council, and I'd be happy to put forward here. I'm sure Dave has some great ideas as well. But we do a rigorous background on everybody that comes, and we have rules that we, you know, ask our renters to abide by and to follow, that are respectful of our neighbors. And you know, we've had tremendous feedback. You know, we've been able to help a single mother start a cleaning company that she's able to, you know, support her son, you know, through the income. I also clean it on my, you know, in my time, but when I'm not able to, she's able to step in, and it's been really helpful for her, as well as other businesses in the area that are able to generate income that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to receive. So I feel for you, Richard. I think that's terrible, you know, that number of people coming through and being disrespectful. But I don't think that every situation is like that. I don't think that's all party houses. And I think there's a way to go about this that can be respectful to everybody. So.
Thanks, Nina.
Of course.
Suzanne. So you're muted, Suzanne. If you, yep. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. I guess there's several things that I just wanted to point out. One is that, I mean, I think we're all fighting this, is that we're dealing with software companies that aren't bricks and mortar for the most part. And so you're dealing with someone who just books that Airbnb or whatever it is. They're not present, they're not there, they just rake in the money. And so I end up fighting with my neighbors, you know, as opposed to someone who is actually a hoteler. So, I mean, and that's an issue that's going to be ongoing. I don't think that's going to change. They're raking in millions and they're going to continue to do it. The second thing is I kind of have the same experience as Richard. I actually am fortunate to have a mainland property where I stay in the winter and I stay on my island in the summer. So, and in both places, I have short-term rentals. Not specifically beside me, across the pond from me is a rental, and beside me on the mainland is a short-term rental that is rented out all summer until the whole season. And it's a constant barrage of noise, dogs barking. They lock them in the cottage and go away, and kids on our island, kids coming and throwing stuff all over the place, using it as a latrine, you know, coming at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's just a constant barrage. It's not a quiet, peaceful place anymore. So that's my 2 cents worth about that. But I think going forward, I think there needs to be regulation and licensing in place. Some of these properties are commercial properties. They're rented out 365 days of the year. If you go on and look at all of that and do a search for it. So, I mean, you can't allow someone to run a commercial venture in a residential property. That just doesn't make sense. And I'm sure you probably have bylaws in Douro-Dummer that address that. But going forward, I think there needs to be some kind of balance and some kind of regulatory balance, just so that we can get this ratcheted down from what it is right now. So anyway, hopefully we can do that.
Thanks, Suzanne. Doug, do you want to weigh in on this situation?
Yeah, from my background up here, I've been on the lake for 73 years. Now, the influx of the COVID regulations brought an opportunity for real estate speculators to move into the area. And a lot of places were bought by short-term rental operators to take advantage of the travel restrictions. And from live experience, in South Bay, we've got a place known as the Queen's Party. It's got 8 bedrooms, an indoor pool, and a flat top boathouse. And when Queen's students want to celebrate getting married, private stags, well, they invite the strippers, they invite the DJs, and they invite the hookers. And this has gone on for multitudes of years. That drove one neighbor into selling her property that she'd owned for decades. From my own personal experience, I'm nearby a short-term rental. I've kicked 20 trespassers off my island. I've had to post that no trespassing. I've experienced guests that rent sea-doos, and to rent a skidoo up here, you don't have to have a boating license. And after a few beers, they become cowboys, and they do donuts to show off to their friends in the dock. Or they discover the big floating rentals where the company brings in Mother Goose and the pink flamingo, and they float around day in and day out with drinks in their hands. And if the waterfront's no good in front of their rental, they pick a nicer waterfront off of my place to float around. I was involved in drafting the Douro-Dummer general bylaw. And as I was the sole cottager representative, and as we addressed commercial uses in shoreline residential, there aren't any in that bylaw other than limited home office with no outside visibility or signage, or bed and breakfast. But on shoreline areas, it was limited to 1 unit within a property owned and occupied by the owner. Other areas of the township, you can have 4 units in a bed and breakfast, but to reduce impact to neighbors, that was reduced to 1. So bed and breakfasts weren't an issue because the owner's present. These short-term rentals are quite different. It's booking hotel rooms, by paying by credit card, strangers meeting strangers to conduct commerce. I'm sorry, we live in a residential zone, not a commercial zone. There are tourist commercial areas in the township. There's highway commercial that permit them. When I talk to resort operators, they think unfair competition because they pay twice the risk that
Sounds like
shoreline.
hearsay. That sounds like hearsay, but sorry to interrupt.
You are interrupting. And I've spoken to 2 or 3 hotel owners, and they say they go under safety inspections, health inspections. Well, I witnessed nearby an Airbnb with a septic capacity for 2 bedrooms with 11 people staying overnight. What's that doing to our water quality and our lake in general? There's no respect. It's how many rooms you can rent a night. No respect for septic capacity. I've witnessed fire burning during fire bans. So it's a litany of multiple complaints, not just 1 or 2. So that's my comment. I endorse either an outright ban or a strict license and limit it to principal residents who are operating on a less than 60-day basis.
Okay, thank you.
So sorry, Harold, I was wondering if I could clarify. Doug, you just cut out a little bit for me. Apologies if it cut out for other people, but where you said what you endorse, I want to make sure I get it down correctly. Can you repeat that, Doug?
Well, as I've looked at all the zoning bylaws across the province, many of them, and I noticing City of Toronto, Niagara on the Lake, down around Trenton, Hastings Highland, they're all limiting, you've got to prove it's your principal residence by photo ID, proof your utility bills go there. And then you can license those units for up to 60-day rentals, but you've got to prove you live there. On our lake, we've got one owner who's now bought 12 separate rental properties. So that's a pure commercial usage and taking full advantage. If you limit it to principal residences, then you can knock out the multiple operator that owns 12 of these things in the neighborhood.
Oh, Doug, I just want to clarify because what I'd heard is you endorse an outright ban or strict, and then I lost a little bit of that. I just wanted you to repeat that for my notes.
Okay, strict licensing with inspections, septic capacity recognized, fire and safety inspections, and I would favor prove it's your principal residence. Otherwise, you wind up with a circumstance that one person can own 12 separate cottages around the lake. If it's the principal residence, then that eliminates that person. And it's very common to make a principal residence requirement.
Hey, got it, Doug. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, thanks, Doug. I'm going to weigh in on this conversation as well. I was a long-term, how do I say it? Investment property owner. I invested in real estate quite heavily. I had up over 13 buildings at one point in my 30-year of renting. So I'm well aware of the renting business, the long-term renting business. And for the most part, it's not a whole lot different than short-term rentals. Only thing with short-term rentals is you got a cleaning staff that you got to get there and get it cleaned for the next one. But I'm fully aware of the rental business. I was in business for pretty near 30 years before I sold most of my properties off. And I can assure you that dealing with government and having the government in my back pocket, dealing with tenants, you get good tenants and you get poor tenants in the long-term rental business. Short-term rentals, I believe in a lot of cases, especially if I look at where they're going and what they're doing, they're happy tenants for the most part. They're coming to a lake, they're coming for a holiday. And I can also tell you from my standpoint that I have used short-term rentals, and if the short-term rentals were not there, I would not have been traveling to where I went. I went to Scotland. Every hotel room was booked and there was nothing there except short-term rentals. So that was how I was able to facilitate my trip, was using short-term rentals. And in most cases, I believe if you look at Airbnb sites, there's an opportunity there on Airbnb to weed out poor tenants and poor guests that come and cause disturbances, cause all kinds of problems. I look at this, what I've heard, and this was really strange to me. I'd never even heard of so many problems about this, I guess, until after COVID that was happening on the lakes, until I ran for council. And this is when I started hearing about all these issues around short-term rentals. And if I look at short-term rentals, I also believe that we have ways and methods of actually strengthening the current laws that we actually have, and that is noise bylaws. We can actually look at strengthening that up. As far as licensing and committing licensing, I'm for small business within our township. I will tell you, I've been a small business owner, and anybody that isn't if you're putting out a short-term rental, if you're collecting more than $30,000 in rent, guess what? You better be paying your fair share of taxes to the federal government, or they are coming after you for that money. So as far as looking at people that are renting it out, in some cases, some people, I have my daughter and son-in-law in another municipality that have a short-term rental. And they rent that out. They're not on a lake, but people just want to get out of the city and come to a short-term rental. They have no issues that I'm aware of. They live right next door to it. So it allows them to actually help pay for some money on their mortgage. And if I look at any cottages that are up there, if we look at, as the price of stuff goes up, there's a lot of people that are able to put out maybe a short-term rental for maybe a month or maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But we got to accept the fact that they are paying the taxes on that property. And we have to consider their rights as property owners of who owns the property and who actually pays the taxes. And yes, if I will admit that people unfortunately do not have a lot of, they're not gentlemen and ladies anymore, unfortunately, and they don't sometimes care so much about the neighbors, and that's unfortunate too. And that, in going back to Richard's comments there, I do understand, and I do understand some people that but for the most part, you got to look at the good in people. You know something, if the rules and regulations are there, they will abide by them. And especially if they don't, we have other mechanisms to send to make them habits, or make them people that are not so nice, to hopefully conform and be a little better people to their neighbors. And that's what it's all about, is being neighborly to the neighbors and expecting and respecting your rights as a property owner as well. I think it's a mutual respect amongst property owners, or that's my take on it anyways. And as far as changing zoning and stuff, it's when I was in the rental business, anything, I owned a lot of properties that was under 6 units. It's zone residential. That's the way it is. Commercial doesn't take place until it's much larger. And if you look at that, even around our lake, anything that's zoned commercial, they're paying commercial tax because they're into it in a huge way. They don't have one family coming in and renting a cottage. It's no different than me using the roads and using all the facilities to get there to that cottage. It's one family, no different than my family taking my family to a cottage that would be on Stony Lake. But if I'm going to a commercial property, could be, I don't know, 160 guests maybe staying at that. So you put that much more stress on everything else. Well, that is zone commercial. That's the way it's set up to be. And I think we can actually bring our planner in to talk about that, about what is the difference between commercial and residential. I believe there is a drastic difference in that. So that's kind of my comments and my thoughts, and I do strongly believe in the person that is actually paying the bills and paying that property tax. We don't want to limit them to, if they want to rent it out, or even rent it out to a family member. And how do you police that? We don't have the finances. Like, we're not a big community like Niagara Falls, or we're not. And every area has different issues or different problems. But as far as licensing, that's just a nightmare to try and never keep track of that. And we don't have the finances available in this community to it's like hiring a full-time person to manage that. And how do you police that? It's like you could go to the door and people go underground as soon as you start putting people will go underground once you start putting a lot of rules and regulations on. And that's exactly what they do. You have no idea who's living, renting, or doing whatever in that piece of property. So that's my comments, folks. And anyways, I do believe that we can strengthen some of our current laws. And I know AJ has alluded to that. But I think that's the only way that we can hopefully curb some of the reactions and the problems that, you know, you people, and they're real. I get that. I understand the problems that you are facing, and in some cases, unfortunately, us as landowners, everybody deals with that when a new neighbor moves in. Sometimes that's not the best neighbor, but it does come down to being respectful of each other. That's all I have to say. Sorry, I didn't mean to take up too much time there, but Alana, where do we move from here?
Thanks. I just wanted to go back to Doug's question, just with regard to the opinion letter that was provided from Eric Burles at our council meeting. We did have that in closed session. So I just think, AJ, maybe you and I can just review that to determine whether or not it's something that we're prepared to release in open. Certainly something that I think we just have to be cautious, just because it hasn't been provided in open session as of yet, I don't believe. So that's just on quick glance, and I'll continue to take a look. But from what I have here, I think we only provided that in closed.
Okay, anybody else? Alana? Sorry, Jeff, yes, you had a question?
Yeah, just on regulatory authority over everything. I think we got to be so careful. Doug, you mentioned a whole bunch of things about septics, and amount of people and things like that. Like your little cottage with 11 people there, that's an issue in itself. We got to be careful we're not pointing fingers and having 3 more pointing back, and to have inspections like that on everybody. That would be a blanket across the whole township. It's just so over the top. And talking about 3 different places that have been affected by Airbnbs that rent out on our lake, that's hearsay for one. And the ones I've talked to say the exact opposite. One doesn't want the business from the lake, and the other one can't take on the family aspects. So it's about keeping the community regulated within ourselves instead of bringing all these other municipalities and everything. Let's work as a committee to abide, like to fix our committee and our community and regulate our community that suits us, not necessarily big municipalities and townships and cities that, you know, have to be overregulated just due to the situation at hand. But we have a different situation, so I think we got to keep it under control in our area, and do our best to accommodate everybody here.
Right.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Dave.
Yeah, and if I may further to that, I think, as I said before, it's so important that we just deal with the bad apples and not punish people that have been doing things well and proper and respectfully for a long time. There are a number of reasons that people rent and a number of scenarios as to why they have to rent, and I'm happy to discuss those with you. As people I represent, some in the family, some have kids going to university, some have jobs out of town. Did I lose my internet connection there? I just got a note. Can you hear me? Did you lose me?
You broke up there a bit.
Sorry. So I'm happy to talk about the unique situations as to why people rent or why they have to rent. And my concern with a lot of restriction on that is that you are punishing good people and limiting their ability to do things. If they're going to do things right, do things proper, do things respectfully, and as a benefit to their, to themselves and be good to their neighbors and their community, I think we have to, be careful we don't punish them and impose too many restrictions on that. And I'd be happy to give you a scenario that I'm dealing with personally. with my own property in Douro-Dummer as well, and my parents, who are in their very late 80s, and it's a family cottage, and they are in poor health. I don't know how long they're going to stay there. I want to be able to keep that as a home. My kids want to go back there. My kids want to live there. Are we going to say they can't live in Douro-Dummer because they can no longer afford it, or because I can only rent for 60 days? They're in university right now. They can't afford a property. So should something, God forbid, happen to my parents in the next little while, I either have an option then of renting it, or I would have to sell it. And that would be a shame. As I said, I have connections into Douro-Dummer. My kids play hockey in Douro-Dummer. I've been here a long time. I would hate to have to say that Douro-Dummer has forced me to leave.
Okay, thanks for that, Dave.
Maybe if I could, it's Doug Owens. As
Go ahead,
AJ
Doug.
familiar, up in Ottawa, there is a condominium case. And the judge decided in that case, specifically talking about a platform rental, that you check in, you check out, you pay by credit card, you pay a security deposit. They are commercial uses as opposed to a residential use. So it's been clearly defined by the courts that this is a commercial use. There's not good and bad. It's a use situation. Yes, some are no problem, but we're not talking about individual users. We're talking about zoning. And we have commercial zoning and we have residential zoning. The judge in the Ottawa case clearly said this is a commercial use. As far as the township dealing with things, we've had the Queen's Party House on the lake for 8 years. We have one operator who now owns 12 around the lake. How is township going to regulate this past misuse? Nothing's happened. Nothing.
We have police.
I'd like to weigh in on that, Doug. Doug, our zoning bylaw is, I believe I'd really like to bring Christina, our planner, in and talk about what zoning bylaws. I think that's probably a doable thing for the committee, and bring her forward and talk to the committee about our current zoning bylaws. I don't believe that's the answer, as AJ has alluded to that. I think AJ, you can pretty much every municipality that tried to do that with zoning has been shot down. Is that correct, AJ?
No, Harold, sorry, that's not correct. Zoning
Okay.
has been used with respect to short-term accommodation and vacation rentals. I gave a couple of different examples and a couple of different approaches. Niagara Falls being one, for example, where it's permitted in the applicable tourist zones, and a community group did challenge Niagara Falls approach with respect to that, where they defined vacation rental units as permissible in commercial zones and regulated and not permissible in other areas. And they were not shut down. They were successful upon challenge at the tribunal, and I believe it was a 2021 decision. I read it this morning. So there are a variety of examples. The one that I think you're referencing, Harold, is Oro-Medonte thought to use their existing rental, and the difficulty with that decision, I think it's a very poorly worded decision, quite frankly, because it didn't give guidance, definitive guidance in either direction on. It's a bit of a convoluted decision, and I think it does need to be corrected by the divisional court, because the tribunal decision dealt with only the confirmatory bylaw or the clarification bylaw that said, we're trying to clean this up and this is a clarification, but it didn't deal with the pre-existing bylaw with respect to a prohibition on commercial use in other areas. It would have been helpful, I think, for every municipality to have some guidance from the tribunal in that decision, in terms of, did the prior bylaw that dealt with commercial uses and commercial prohibitions, would that be successful? The tribunal, in a sense, kicks it down the line to say, well, municipality, if you believe that and you prosecute and you're challenged, then you may be successful. But it doesn't, it should give guidance, I think, to municipalities so that we can give guidance to municipalities to know what does that mean. So I found it to be a bit of a disappointing decision in terms of clarification, quite frankly, because it didn't say one way or the other with respect to the previous bylaw. So I'm giving a bit of a long-winded answer here because unfortunately, the decision I don't find affords us the appropriate clarity to say how the tribunal would be. Then the question is, so what about the previous bylaw? How would you treat that? And they sort of sidestep the issue, which is not helpful in terms of clarity for everyone involved in terms of the approach.
Okay.
So sorry that doesn't, it's not really a helpful answer, but it's the accurate answer.
Thanks a lot, AJ.
Not
Appreciate
applicable
it.
up here.
Sorry,
There's
Sorry,
such a
would you-
difference between the
something,
commercial
Jen?
properties down there and the commercial properties up here. It's just such a broad difference. Like, it's just, we're regulating the daylights out of ourselves unnecessarily. This is something that can be addressed within our community, you know, and to bring in all this other townships and all these other, it's just, we're going to be shooting ourselves in our foot. That's at the end of the day. So we got to protect ourselves as a community, I think. And that's got to be number one.
okay, thanks for that, Jeff.
Oh, there's also ways through Airbnbs. You can complain directly to the host. And if the people don't, you can have the people removed right away by police and everything else. So there's all kinds of ways to address these forms like VRBO and Airbnb. If it's neighbor someone renting out, well, they got to be friends with your neighbor. And if they're just a jerk, well, they might be a jerk with their family in there with not for rent. So it's an individual by individual, case by case situation. Sorry, thank you.
Yep. Thanks for that, Jeff. I seen Suzanne's hand up there. Suzanne?
And I think part of what we're missing is that a lot of those properties are rented out for quite a number of weeks every year. I don't know, if you search on Airbnb, there's thousands of them that pop up. But the thing that really bothers me is they're renting them out. They're not paying commercial property taxes. There's extra garbage, there's extra policing, there's extra everything. And as a residential property owner, we're footing those bills. They're not. The guy that has the 12 properties rented out, he's not paying commercial taxes, but he's paying HST and he's certainly making over $30,000. He's running that commercially. So he's not paying those property taxes appropriately, and all of us are paying for them. And being a small community, we haven't planned for that extra population that pops up every summer for sure, extra thousands of people, and it's not planned for. And it, all that usage is extra burden on the taxpayers. And I think we need to look at it from that aspect too.
Suzanne, in answer to your question there, if I may, when a cottage owner rents out his cottage, whether it be for a week or whatever that might be, and the people that are renting that cottage, I'm sorry, but the property owner is actually paying taxes. He's paying taxes for that property. That through the township, that property taxes is dispersed for the garbage, it's dispersed for everything else, and it is not commercial use. I am sorry that we disagree on that, and it is actually residential use. He's rented his cottage out, and again, how do we know? Maybe it's family that's using it. We hear all this. I went on the Airbnb site, and on Stony Lake, I could only find 3 places that was actually on Stony Lake for Airbnb. I don't know whether they're on maybe another site, but this is before I even got involved, before even the election, when people were talking to me about this. I went on and I could find one other big place in North Kawartha that was on the lake. I tend to wonder how much of this is actually hearsay and how much is actually, well, how many people are actually renting out their property? I don't know.
Okay,
It's
Harold, I
it's
I
hard
can
to
send you a
determine.
screenshot of a search of Airbnb for Douro-Dummer or Stony Lake, whatever you want, and it's not 2 or 3. But that's besides the point. I disagree with you that that isn't commercial use. If you're not staying there and there's no one to contact, if there's anything going wrong at that place, you're just a ghost, essentially. Then that's not someone who is living at that property.
Well, I can also say I'm for free enterprise too. And if I want to, me as a business owner, if I want to go and buy 12 places on Stony Lake and rent them back out, that's what you call free enterprise. That's what a free country is. And that's what we're based on. We're based on a free country and free enterprise. And if I want to go and purchase, if I want to purchase 100 places and rent them out, that's as long as I pay my taxes on that and look after the properties and actually pay my taxes, what's the harm in doing that?
You're changing the fabric of the community. That's what's changing.
In a lot of cases, I would not even be able to go and rent places. There's all kinds of people that tell me this. I would not even be able to go and stay on Stony Lake for a week and enjoy myself, have a great holiday, take my kids and do that unless I was able to rent it. And there's been rentals on Stony Lake all of my life. I know all kinds of people that rent their cottages out, and that has been a way of life on Stony Lake. For to have go and rent a cottage on Stony Lake. The people don't stay there or live there, but they are able to rent a cottage for a week and enjoy the same luxuries as people that have a lot of money that are able to own the cottage themselves. So why would we want it? It's actually inhibitive of tourism. Why do we want to stop tourism within our community? It also brings other stuff to that. The gas stations, the restaurants, the other people in business that actually make their living on that. I know different people that work around the lake. I actually worked around the lake. In fact, I worked for Drain Brothers in my very early career, and we put most of the septic beds in out on the islands on Stony Lake. So I'm very aware of the lake, and I'm very aware of what has transpired with the lake in the last 60 years. It's grew from being a little mom and pop cottage to being, in lots of cases, a lot of big mansions, and that growth has happened. And if you want to talk about septic systems and all of that, they've all been inspected. They've all been put in there at one time, and they were all put in legal in the last, put it this way, the last 40, 50 years. There might be some old stuff out there, but I doubt it.
If I can
For
comment
the
on
most part,
systems, Harold,
pardon me?
put in septic systems and they've got a capacity
Correct.
depending on the number of bedrooms. Now, if I'm an operator of, say, Airbnb, I want to maximize my income, and I do that by dividing it by the maximum number of guests that day. So if I've got a 2-bedroom place and 11 people choose to rent it, nothing is stopping me now from doing that.
That's unrealistic. That's really unrealistic. Totally, Doug. That's just fabricated. That's not accurate. We need to discuss accurate things, not made up stuff. Don't make things up. We have enough of a task at hand to make up that. You can't have 11 people stay with 2 beds. It just doesn't work like that. I'm sorry. It just doesn't.
Pictures, and I can show you 5 cars in the driveway.
I can show you pictures of your house. I can show you your pictures of your house a couple years ago with 6 people, 6 cars there, and 15 people staying for the weekend. Then we have to regulate all the people, every homeowner. It's absolutely ridiculous. Let's stay at the
You're
point at
absolutely
hand
right.
instead of jumping everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Order for a second. Anyways, thanks for your comments. I appreciate that. I will say this, Doug, just on the septic issue. There isn't anybody that's probably hasn't went over their maximum in a day of guests that they're allowed in your house. And you could hold I've held a birthday party for my granddaughter, and I've had probably 50 people in the house. Well, if you have 50 people in the house all going using the bathroom all the same day, well, guess what? It's overloaded that day, but for the most part, it's like this. It's not on a regular basis. And I can't see that Airbnbs or rental of a cottage, there isn't anybody in their right mind that's going to have 11 people staying in a 2-bedroom cottage for a week. That's unrealistic. It might happen for a day. Yeah, maybe friends, family, or whoever rented it might show up for the day, but they're not staying there. They're not staying for the week. That's totally unrealistic, as Jeff said.
If I can also interject, the judicial system's already examined this issue. And when you rent through a platform on the internet, the courts have distinguished that use from the traditional, you rent a place in Stony Lake through word of mouth or an ad you see. And it's very clear the courts have defined these as commercial uses, period. I live in an area zoned residential. Commercial uses are not a permitted use. If you want to talk about just big cities can afford to do this, well, you've got other townships like Town of Blue Mountain, Tay, Tiny, Oro Medonte, Seguin. Their municipalities are size. They've brought in rules, regulations, and licensing. So that is not a defense to not having rules and regulations and licensing.
Well, I think by the complaints that I'm hearing that there is other methods, Doug, of strengthening up the issues of the problems that we're seeing, and that is through our current bylaws is stiffening up noise bylaws, stiffening up if there's garbage, if they're throwing garbage out and there we got ways around dealing with that. So other than noise and garbage, what else is there? What else is there as far as complaints?
With Sea-Doo rentals, when unlicensed boaters can rent a Sea-Doo delivered to your dock for 3 days, and they don't know any rules of the road out there. They're cowboys.
Just a minute, Doug. Just a minute. That's not our jurisdiction. Sorry, that's so far from our jurisdiction.
That's just not renters. That's anybody.
That could be anybody,
yeah,
be a neighbor.
That's anybody.
It doesn't matter, Doug. There's boating license. I have a boating license. I've required to have a boating license ever since the province put that in place. And if I'm renting a Sea-Doo, I can tell you, if I go to rent a Sea-Doo, I better be showing my boater's license.
Oh,
or they ain't giving me Sea-Doo.
You do not need a boater license to rent a Skidoo.
Well, that again
It's not just renters. It's not just renters who rent snowmobiles and skidoos and boats or houseboats or other things. I can tell you that it's predominantly not renters. If you go up to the person there in North Kawartha Township and discuss with him who his demographic is, he will tell you it's day visitors. Day visitors are not renters. Day visitors are not staying for a week on the lake. They're renting for a day and leaving. They're coming up maybe for a night or somewhere. People don't rent for a night or two in the summer. They don't. It's just all weekly.
Thank you.
I think we're getting a little off topic here about renting Sea-Doos and stuff like that. I'd like to say just a couple of words here just to bring us back here. There's a lot of talk about the rights of the person that's bought a property and wants to rent it out. And believe it or not, I may sound like I'm not. I'm actually an idealist at heart. I don't like regulation. The townships having to call to light a campfire, I think is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, but we can park that for now. But we need to talk about the rights of the property owner that bought their property that is choosing not to rent it out. We have rights as well. and that is to enjoy our property as we intended to use it when we bought it, which is, you know, I know these are, you know, silly words, but like just a quiet enjoyment of my cottage and just a reasonable enjoyment of my property. So just to say, well, the guy next door bought it and wants to rent it out, too bad. That's just, we have rights too, as people that choose not to participate in this manner. So that's what, and let's bring it back on track. We're getting a little bit off there. Like, this is about us figuring out a solution between the two sides. Again, I'm not a big regulation person, but in response to Jess, it's like, what happens when I text my neighbor, when I call them, and you know, but then the next set of renters comes in a week later, they don't know the same rules. So then I'm texting 3-4 times a month about the same thing. And now that's disrupting my enjoyment. I'm just sitting on my deck reading a book. And now I'm texting my neighbor going, neighbor's doing this, renter's doing this, there's a dog on my deck. So we need to, I mean, you know, whatever we choose to do, the people that are choosing to run their homes like this, there needs to be a proper education if we're choosing to somehow say this is okay to do. Again, and back to Dave, I've never, sorry, take this with a grain of salt. I've never heard of you, Dave, and apparently you've been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah.
So there's a way to do it.
There's absolutely a way to do it.
But there's a lot of people that don't. I mean, people's discernment just seems to be their buying purchase of the property is how much can I get to rent it out? And I'm going to throw it on here and that's it. Set it and forget it. And look at, it's across the province. It's across the world. This is a problem that exists. So we can't just say, oh, big deal, rent it out. That's the way it is. You know, it's like, no, there's people here that are having issues with it. So we need to figure out what works for both sides so that people can get their income if they need it or want it. And then the other people aren't being disrupted, their life, like they're just their normal life where they live or use it as a cottage. Anyways, that's.
Lana? Sorry.
Thank you. Just thought it might be helpful if we could just speak to kind of what the township is doing currently. So we did go back and look at our nuisance bylaws. We did start to do some work on them, and then the city came in with an administrative monetary penalty program that they said they would allow us to participate in, which just helps us collect on any of those nuisance bylaws. So prior to this, or what they currently are now, there's no set fines in those bylaws. So for those of you that are contacting the OPP, they're coming out. The OPP don't have any ability to charge for noise or dogs at large. And that's because of the structure of our bylaws. So we are working at revising those. We are waiting for the city to finalize their program so that our bylaws can be in line. We've also talked to other lower tier municipalities, not that it speaks specifically to this issue, but trying to have similar bylaws to assist the OPP in enforcement. So we are going to continue to do that. And that's, you know, outside of the short-term rental issue, that's a municipal wide issue. We will look at, obviously, the dogs at large. We will look at noise. We've had some discussion about fireworks, and I don't know if that's an issue, if that's something that we need to address. Obviously, we already have the permit requirements for burning. So if there's other things that we can regulate in that sense, then I think this is a good forum to have that discussion. And we will work towards those bylaws, and hopefully we have those in place even for this current season. Our zoning bylaw, and we've talked about it a little bit, it's very outdated. I know when we look at the Oro-Medonte case and we try to look at municipalities that are similar to ours, Oro-Medonte isn't perfectly similar, although their zoning bylaw was about the same age and very similar definitions. And so I think it will be important for us just to watch that decision and see what comes back. We will be looking at a new zoning bylaw next year. So again, as the chair said, we can have Christina come in and speak specifically to our current zoning bylaw and maybe have some discussion about how, you know, what ideas we have for a new zoning bylaw, if there is opportunity there. Our official plan right now is in a bit of transition, let's say. We do have an official plan. There is a new official plan that we've joined with the county that is currently with the province. We are waiting on approval, although we don't have any indication when that's going to come through. So potentially Christina could give us sort of an overview of where we stand with that and what the new official plan looks like as well. So that might just give us a little bit of information going forward. It seems Dave and Nina have short-term rentals. They seem to work well. They haven't received any complaints. We didn't even know Dave existed. So maybe, you know, during this conversation, the next meeting, you can share what you've done. So if we do look at how we might want to regulate, you know, what do you do that the municipality actually has any ability to regulate? Because some of these things we just don't, you know, we can't force short-term rentals to scrutinize their renters, and, you know, those that do their due diligence, that's great. But maybe there is ideas there that we haven't thought of, and ways that the municipality can support the responsible short-term renter.
Okay, thanks for that, Alana. I guess moving on, I believe with Alana that we can bring Christine in and have a discussion around that as well. And I think that might give a real good background for everybody, and try and move forward and see if we can come up with some collective thoughts and move forward with a recommendation to our council. Do we have a next meeting date, Alana?
We currently do not, so we can look to do that again. I would give us enough time that I can guarantee Christine is available. And if there's anything else, you know, if there's anything else the committee would like to see, I will, AJ, once I receive those the email from you regarding that other township, I can forward that. We can certainly talk about the opinion letter and what we can provide to the committee just for some guidance. I think essentially, from what I recall, most of the opinion letter included what AJ spoke to today, but we can certainly take a look at that as well for the committee.
Well, there's definitely some difference of opinions I see on the committee. And I appreciate that. And I hope that we collectively can come to working through this as a committee. We can come up with some really good recommendations for council on how to deal with this issue in taking everybody's concerns involved back to council and making some good recommendations for the short-term rentals. Or that's my hope anyways, or my goal as chair of the committee is to you know, take respectfully back to council something that we can all live with, and everybody in the township would be proud to say, call it our own. So I'll that's my kind of closing statement for today's meeting. If there's anything else that anybody would like to weigh in on, I'll open the floor again. Not seeing any hands.
Sorry, Harold, I might have derailed the next meeting date, so maybe we should have, we should go back to that to see if we can come up with a date today here.
You got a date there in mind, Alana?
I guess, I mean, I'm relatively open if we look at 4 weeks from now, towards the end of March. Obviously, March break and that sort of thing gets busy, so I don't know if there's particular days that are more appropriate for people. I mean, we could look at the Friday, March the 24th.
Alana, are you looking for me to attend?
I don't think so at this point. I think if we have further discussion, if there's things that we need, either I can circle back around or we can bring you back. Thank you, though.
May I ask AJ a question? AJ, if you declare a pecuniary interest of yourself, does that include immediate family? And if it does, if you have a pecuniary interest, does that disqualify you from being on committee? AJ, do you hear my question?
Yeah, Doug, I heard your question in terms of the scope of a pecuniary interest. Would reference specifically the applicable code of conduct and the definition of pecuniary interest. Commonly, people do consider a spousal interest to be in common with a particular individual. So without giving you a definitive answer sort of on the fly, because I have to think about it, but typically that would be considered in the category of pecuniary interest, subject to review of the applicable codes of conduct and what have you. But commonly, I would, if asking for overall advice about pecuniary interest, suggest taking into account close familial relations, specifically spouses, if that helps your question, Doug.
Yeah, my one question would be, the deputy mayor, who's chairman of this committee, did acknowledge that his daughter does have an Airbnb or and does operate it as such. So I question whether that's a pecuniary interest that affects the ability of the deputy mayor to be chair of this committee.
Oh, we're going there, eh? Well,
Maybe we should
I
divide
can
as a
tell you
committee.
that
Maybe we
that
should
is
vote as a
not-
committee.
I can tell you that that is not within this township, so has nothing to do with this township or me. I just quoted that they run one. My daughter and son-in-law do have an Airbnb, but it's not in this township.
Thank you.
So anybody got a laptop we give Doug so we can see Doug too? I'll look into finding an iPad for you, Doug.
That'd be very kind of you, but I'll do what I can do. I'm happy to attend in person at next meeting in council chambers.
So we have, I believe, March 24th.
I think that didn't work for Suzanne.
Okay. Would we like to maybe send an invite out for the next meeting, Ilana? Would that work?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll send out a few options, and then if people can just reply all, so that if some have 2 dates that are available and they can see somebody isn't available, they can narrow it down for me. That would be great.
Yeah, I think that sounds like the best idea. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today on this. If there's anything else, I would ask for a motion to close the meeting. Nina and Jeff, all in favor? Okay. Thanks, everybody, and look forward to the next meeting.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.